Welcome, this is Bill Donahue with Discerning Truths. Me and apparently the neighbor with the lawnmower. So hopefully it's not too loud for you guys. Uh, I can hear it over my earphones, so hopefully it's not too disturbing. But we're here, and I stream Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Pacific time. Monday and Wednesday, I'm always in the book of the Bible. Right now I'm in Daniel, the book of Daniel. On Fridays, I talk about other things, usually related to Christianity. Now, when I want to discuss things that are not necessarily related, I write on SubStack. I might write articles on cryptocurrency about dealing with autism and dyslexia, trying to find my way, different subjects. And I wrote an article on Substack that is called Globalist in the Spirit of Antichrist. And it's because of that connection to Antichrist that I thought this might actually be something beneficial to the people in my stream, right? That listen to me, and to understand what's going on. And then the fact that Donald Trump was at the World Economic Forum in Davos this last week. It's spot in the news right now. And when I seen Neil call it WEF this morning, I said, well, maybe I shouldn't have abbreviated it. But it's the World Economic Forum. And they are a globalist. And they've been talking about a great reset. It really ramped up. They've been talking about this for years. But when the pandemic happened, they really increased their openness, talking about what they were doing. And you'll see things like this graph about this great reset. And they use slogans: fairer economic system, okay? A fourth industrial revolution. Doesn't that sound great? Global cooperation. That's a good thing. A new social contract. What does that mean? And decarbonization. Well, I don't know about you, but I love this planet, and it's my home for now. I mean, it's not really my home, but it's I think God put us in charge of taking care of this planet, and we ought to do a better job of it. So some of those goals I might even agree with. But the issue is when you dig down into the World Economic Forum, and this graph is kind of small, so I'm just going to hit some highlights. It involves every aspect of society, okay? But you're going to see they always talk about it in positive things. It's strategic foresight. It's a things about the democratization of futures, of our futures, talking about expanding democracy and doing all that stuff. And wow, it sounds nice. When you start getting down into what they're actually doing, you go, well, that doesn't seem like it's all, wonderful stuff. I'm seeing some stuff here that might be bothering me, that you're talking about doing. And when I look at the plan proposed by the global elites, right, at the World Economic Forum, at the UN, people in NATO, there are some countries that have really bought into this plan, and leaders of current countries, okay? Starmer in the UK, Macron in France, Joe Biden was 100%. You got what do you call it? Mark Carney in Canada, very big proponent in this plan. One of the original architects of this plan. Okay, so you got people on the world stage that are really pushing for this. So I thought, well, I'm going to start looking at this a little deeper and see what it's dealing with. Because the first thing that you've got to understand, the world is facing, economically, we have two financial crisis that are coming on it. They're looming over us like a anvil over our head in a cartoon waiting to crash. One is a debt crisis. It's not just a U.S. debt crisis. It's a world debt crisis. And then you have a global liquidity crisis. And I'm not going to get too technical in the financial end, but understand that you need a reset in both these areas. There's got to be a change. You got to find a way to lower the debt to earnings ratio like you would in a business, or the business goes under, right? You have like the current financial system. If I'm sending money overseas, it's international business, and I'm transferring money, currently that can take up to 3 to 5 days if you're in an industrialized nation. And if you're in a less industrialized nation, it might take me up to 2 weeks to get your money. There's a lot of cost in that money. From the time I deposit that money into the account to send it to you until you get the money, it's called a hold period, right? And some of you might be familiar with your banks. You deposit a check and they put a 10-day hold on the account. They say, yeah, your money's in your account, but you can't spend it. You can't access it for 10 days until the check clears. Well, that money that is tied up like that in the world is in the trillions of dollars every day. That's creating a liquidity problem. Both of those have to be done. So I'm all in favor of resetting an antiquated financial system. I think that's a great idea, okay? But there's one version of this reset that's being talked about at the World Economic Forum, at the UN, by globalist politicians, that's way grander in scale than anything just with your financial system. So in an attempt to be accurate, I didn't want to misstate what their plans were. I started, Grok's my go-to AI, okay? Because I've learned how to use Grok and not get it to lie to me, okay? At least not often, okay? And I kept asking specific questions, and back from Grok, I would get slogans: stakeholder capitalism, sustainable and resilient economies, digital transformation and innovation, reducing inequality and social justice, and global governance reform. Okay, well, I don't want your slogans. I want to know what the heck your policies are, right? And no matter how I tried to pose the answer, I kept getting more slogans and more boilerplate-like information, because that's the way they talk, okay? This is the way their speech is, and it sounds good and stuff, okay? Like when I really pushed them on stakeholder capitalization, I got an answer back that said the model balances benefits among all stakeholders, including employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and the environment. Well, when my customers and my employees and my suppliers and the communities and the environment become a stakeholder in my business, okay? I'm going, when did that happen, right? So when I dug further into that, I was there. Companies are primarily there to maximize profits for owners. That's their goal. That's your duty to your stockholders, is to make as much money as you can. Okay, now you have to balance that against, I want to keep the best employees, I want to satisfy my customers, I need to maintain a good relationship with my suppliers, I want to be accepted in the communities because they're my customer base, right? And they're where I live and I work and my employees work, so I want to balance that. And like I said, I don't want to be negative to the environment. And most, that's the problem, is we've had some business owners that have not cared about the environment, and we have other people that do. So I can see how I have to take those in, but I don't consider them stakeholders in my business, in the capitalization. That seemed to be a very big change in how we're viewing who owns what, right? And then on digital transformation and innovation, like I said, I understand. I'm invested. Anybody who listened to me before know I'm totally understand why and how we need to change our financial system to a digital system, because it's going to free up that liquidity. I mean, if I can take the trillions of dollars currently held in hold accounts or during transfer and release them in seconds or minutes instead of days or weeks, that frees up a lot of capital. That's good for the country if we can address the debt crisis, partially through um, digitizing and real world assets and doing that. That's a good thing. I understand how that works, but I wanted to know what they thought. What is the World Economic Forum's thought on what it means to do that? And the answers always I get getting back from Gronk were slopes and platitudes, and I'm just trying to dig past that. And so Gronk tells me the World Economic Forum's, the WEF, right? The Great Reset was launched during COVID-19. It actually goes back before that, and Gronk was incorrect, but it really got bigger during COVID-19. And it frames the global debt crisis. It's exacerbated by the soaring public debt and deficit spending and economic shocks. And they see this as an opportunity for systemic reform rather than outright elimination of debt. Okay? So the proponents emphasize sustainable debt management through restructuring, innovative financing, and redirecting resources towards growth and equity, aiming to prevent a great reversal. Again, more platitudes. But I seen that term, great reversal, and I'm going, okay, what's the great reversal? I can't figure out what the great reset is and what's the great reversal. And, so he explained this involves international coordination to make debt more manageable without defaulting. Okay? So we're approaching $39 trillion in U.S. debt. They don't want us to default, but they want to make it manageable. Keep us in debt, but make it manageable. So that doesn't really eliminate the problem. It just perpetuates and shifts the burden, right? So I was already getting a feeling that I didn't like the global reset from the World Economic Forum. And so I was going, well, if I decided I really thought it was a bad idea, how would I go about causing a great reversal, right? And that's in the back of my head, and I'm gonna get to that in a little while. And when I asked about specific policies that promote sustainable and resilient economies, because that's their slogan, the answer spoke about prioritizing green initiatives, and such as transitioning to renewable energy and net zero emissions, while making societies more equitable and resistant to future shocks like climate change. And I go, oh, so we get the Green New Deal is part of their plan. Now, I'm all in favor. If they can make renewable energies cost effective, I'm perfectly fine using them. I took my last house off grid. I felt it was a worthwhile investment for us that made us more secure during power outages. And we lived out in the country, and we didn't have long-term power outages often, but then there was a big fire came through, burned all the power lines for 2 miles, and there was no power for 10 days. Well, we had a well. I needed power to pump the water out of the well. I needed power to run my house. I did all that stuff. I had made my house off grid. Power went down. We were still pumping water. We were having coffee. We were cooking my meat in the freezer and the fridge. All stayed good. I had everything I needed, but a lot of my neighbors didn't because they hadn't prepared. So I'm not against renewable energies and reducing carbon footprints and that kind of stuff. But I'm curious as what they're doing. And then in their things, they talked about building back better. And in this term, I've heard a lot. I live in Kauai, but Maui's not far. And I watched those policies put in action when Lahaina was either allowed to burn, or some people would say it was intentionally burned down. I'm not going to get into the debate over what happened. It was either incompetence on a grand scale, or it was intentional. But within days, the governor was talking about seizing all this privately owned land and rebuilding better, building back better with a smart city, right? And I went, whoa, it's not your land, to build back better on. It belongs to the people whose houses burned down. And then you have this. Well, the people who had those houses, another factor in Kauai is a lot of your insurance, they based on your building costs. And a lot of those insurance policies had a cost per square foot of construction, $100, $200 a square foot. Right now in Kauai, if you want to build anything, your cost of construction is over $1,000 a square foot. Okay? Insurance that's going to pay $200, who's paying up the rest of it? So it made it difficult for some of these people to rebuild. And then when the government, because the people weren't open to just giving up their houses and letting the government take them, their permits all got stalled. The last time I was on Maui, there was one house under reconstruction in a fire zone, and it was on the edge of the fire zone. Nothing in the middle of the fire zone has been rebuilt. Okay? They were given FEMA temporary housing to help it. Homeless problem on Maui exponentially got bigger. But they gave them temporary housing. That's going to run out here pretty soon. And none of the homes have been rebuilt. So this is interesting. Then I watched in a rich neighborhood in the Pacific Palisades in Southern California, where either through gross incompetence again or intentionally that neighborhood was burned. Okay? And politicians were immediately again talking about building a smart city. Now the residents who moved to Pacific Palisades is gorgeous. If you're not familiar with this part of Southern California, absolutely gorgeous. A lot of stars, and people live there just to be that close to the beach. It's a kind of a small towny community. Seems a very small town, and just absolutely beautiful. I would have loved to have grown up in Pacific Palisades. They're not so much interested in a smart city. They wanted their neighborhood back. So what's happened is, because they're not going along with the status quo, they're not getting permits. And a lot of people are not being able to rebuild. And I went, wow, that's interesting. They want to rebuild back better, but you got to destroy what's there first to do that. And I was thinking, what does this have to do with the global debt crisis, which is what I started talking about. I thought this global reset was about fixing the debt crisis. And I started pushing Grok on what the World Economic Forum and other global elites would do, how they would provide debt relief to people. Some countries like Japan is in debt multiple times of its GDP. The United States has a big debt crisis, but it's not multiples of our GDP, right? And he says countries would receive debt relief or restructuring in exchange for commitments to environmental goals, such as protecting biodiversity or reducing emissions. And this frees up fiscal space for green investment while addressing climate risk and worsening debt and vulnerability. So they're basically going to hold your debt over your head to, you're going to go along with our green plan, or we're going to crush you with the debt. If you go along with our green plan, we'll give you some things. And then the economic discussions around tokenization, and that's basically making a digital representation of something, real world assets. Okay, you have a stock, you could tokenize it and have a digital representation of that instead of a physical stock, right? But they're talking about tokenizing untapped natural resources. Now, this is something that ought to get your attention. Imagine if the USA tokenized the value of our national forests, our national parks, our publicly owned land, fresh water, and other natural assets. All the minerals we have, we tokenized it all. And we placed those assets on a ledger, our debt would look minuscule in comparison. It would look like it's not a problem, right? It just goes away. But that's not how you do this. You don't compare debt to the total value of the company, right? You compare debt to the earnings of the company. How much money is the company taking in, or the nation, right? And how can they manage their debt? So they already are playing fast and loose when countries, the national country debt is compared to the gross domestic product, because the government doesn't own the gross domestic product. The businesses producing that product do. What the debt should be compared to is the amount of taxes collected by the government, because that's the assets, that's the earnings it has. And when you compare our almost 39 trillion in debt compared to the taxes being thing, then that debt looks enormous. Okay? But when you tokenize real world assets, natural assets that nobody has ever owned before, nobody owns the water, nobody owns that, right? And these were never previously weren't owned. And you're going to use those digitized assets to cover your debt. Doesn't that really shift the wealth of the world, the entire world, into these unelected elites in the World Economic Forum and whoever else, the UN, whoever decides they're running the show? They're now going to own the assets in the world. Well, that's a little freaky, isn't it? But that's their plan. And as I explained earlier, I understand using blockchain and other technology to free up capital and improve global liquidity, right? The current financial system's slow, it's burdensome, it's outdated. There are trillions of dollars locked up every single day. I'm fine with fixing that, but the devil's in the details. Now, part of the World Economic Forum is that every citizen needs to get a digital ID. Doesn't say a mark in your hand or your forehead, but it's pretty close, right? And you're not going to be able to trade, buy or sell, hold a job, do any stuff if you don't have that digital ID. Certain countries like the UK are already moving forward with that. Okay, a mandatory digital ID. You know, in the USA, we're in the middle of a fight over this issue right now. The President of the United States went against the wishes of the World Economic Forum by banning the issuance of a central bank digital currency in the United States, and he protected what's called your private holding of your assets. You know, that you don't have to leave your assets in the bank or whatever. You can hold them on a cold wallet or whatever, your digital assets. That he protected that. That went through the Congress. In the Senate, what's coming out of the Senate subcommittees in agriculture and that is the exact opposite. It's World Economic Forum policies. It's the insistence on a digital ID. It's the insistence on that you can't hold your money yourself, that you have to let them have control over your money and decide whether you can access your money or not. That's the Senate. And this is not a Republican versus Democratic issue, because Republican Rick Scott proposed that he didn't want you to be able to earn money on your digital assets. No, only banks can do that. Now, some Democrats like Elizabeth Warren, you know, she's very much against any freedom in the United States. So I expected her. But this battle for your economic freedom is not some future battle. It's being fought today, right now, in the U.S. Senate. It's being fought. You didn't get to maybe see the fight that's going on, but at Davos right now, President Trump's making the fight for your freedom. And the people he's fighting against, their plan looks a lot like the plan the Antichrist is going to have at the end times. And that's what got my attention. I said, well, wait a minute, what's going on with this plan? And as I kept going through these slogans with Gronk, like the reducing inequality and social justice. That sounds good, right? But when I pushed again for specific policies, it says it aims to create fairer markets by steering policies towards equitable outcomes, such as wealth redistribution, better access to education and healthcare, and a new social contract centered on human dignity. That's the slogans. I'm asking for the, black and white explanation of what one slogan says, and I get a list of other slogans. But proponents suggest achieving this through progressive taxation, incentives for inclusive growth, and global coordination to prevent poverty spikes, often framed as building back better from crises. So you have to create a crisis to build back better. Ergo, you get the idea that maybe Lahaina and Palisades were burned intentionally. Maybe some floods happened in the South intentionally. That these are crises that are created, and you build back better. Some of your wars that are there, I mean, they create the crises to where they do this. And I've seen many attempts in my lifetime at social engineering involving forcing people to change and comply through government and public pressure. And with the Antichrist, we see a second beast, often called the false prophet, who works hand in hand with the Antichrist to implement his agenda. In the USA, that second beast is manifesting in the media, the social media platforms, influencers, community leaders, and even some church leaders. Remember Franklin Graham telling you, Jesus would have taken the jab, right? You had church leaders out here telling you need to comply. This is the false prophet. It's a religious group, moral people that are claiming moral superiority that are telling you have to go along. And the idea, building back better after crisis idea, just keeps coming up again and again when you're reading this stuff. And so, I'm looking at, California has wildfires every year. When I was young, we, scouting and different people, used to go out and clear underbrush and to make fire breaks and cut fire breaks and help the fire department. They changed their policy that they felt like that was environmentally bad in order to let goats and sheep out there, eat the brush and do that to create these fire breaks. So now California has massive fires. Canada has massive fires because there's no forest management going on, right? And after those massive fires, towns like Paradise are destroyed. And then they tell us we're going to build back better. Well, you created the problem. You created the crisis, and now you're giving me a solution to the crisis that I didn't ask for, right? And then, when it talked about equality of outcome, I went, whoa, because there's a big difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Even equality of opportunity is kind of a myth. I was born into an Irish Catholic family in Massachusetts. So are the Kennedy children. Did we really have equal opportunities? They certainly had advantages in wealth, political connections, and other things, right? But what it means is I was given every freedom to better my own economic situation. So there is an equality in that sense. But don't pretend I had the same opportunity that somebody with a Kennedy last name had. But nobody promised me, nor should they have promised me, that me and the Kennedy are going to have the same outcome. See? But they're talking about an equality in outcome. Well, if you're going to have an equality in outcome, it's going to be a very low equality. They're going to remain up here, but everybody else is going to have this low equality, right? And if you believe the wealthy elite in the world really want you and I to have an equal share of their pie, then I got a bridge to sell you in the Bay of San Francisco. But when pressed on the World Economic, what it sees as equality outcome, Grok again reverted to substanceless slogans, right? And it claims to have a goal of wealth distribution, caught my eye, because I see people in power with unbelievable greed. And it's unbelievable greed to think they should own or control the world's natural resources, right? In exchange for debt relief, a debt that they created by their forever wars and by their other plans and through waste, fraud, and abuse and other things. They created this massive debt. And now they're saying we're going to redistribute that we're going to fix your debt problem, and all we got to do is have control over all your natural resources. Well, that's greed on a whole nother level. They want to own stuff nobody has ever owned. And they plan to put the world's wealth under control of a few elites who would tell us what to do with it because they think they know better. This is the plan. This is what's going on. This is what a lot of the people at Davos are arguing for. And once again, I kept pushing Grok on a straight answer is who are asset owners and shareholders, right? Because it said asset owners and shareholders may see short-term profits, a reduction in short-term profits as resources are diverted to stakeholders. And I go, okay, so that means me, if I own a business or I own a house or I own anything and I own an asset or I have money in the bank, I'm going to see a reduction in that while they try to do their global reset. Okay? And they're doing it, they're going to transfer that money to these shareholders. And I already told you the shareholders include them, since they are the environment, they're going to own the environment, right? They're going to have ownership in every house, every business, everything. This is crazy massive wealth grab by a few unelected people who are millionaires and billionaires already, and they're talking about grabbing this. But look at how they're just redistributing this wealth. They're not going to give it to us. Like I said, I think you have to be a complete fool to believe they're really going to give you their wallet. And if they want to prove to me they want to give me their wallet, just write me a check for part of Soros's money, right? Send me a couple $100,000, whatever, send everybody out some money. That'll prove to me you want to redistribute your wealth. But what I see is they want to redistribute the world's wealth into their pocket. And they're going to use debt as the tool to force us to go along. We'll either crush you in your debt or you got to do it. And then they talked about global governance reform, which calls for stronger international collaboration to tackle shared challenges, potentially redesigning institutions for more effective multilateralism. This could involve updating frameworks like trade agreements and climate accords, with critics arguing it risks increasing centralized control from entities like the UN and the World Economic Forum to achieve via summits and policy agreements and voluntary commitments from leaders, right? And then he further tells me that governments and international bodies like the UN and their sustainable development goals provide incentives like tax breaks for inclusive practices and penalties for noncompliance. Okay? This pressures asset owners to share benefits, such as through profit sharing and employee and community investment, effectively reallocating some returns from pure ownership dividends. Now, I don't know about you, but I never voted for anybody in the global government to be there. They're unelected leaders, they're unelected body. I never voted for them. I can't vote them out. I have no say in who is out there. I voted for a president and Congress and Senate and local representatives. I didn't vote for anybody in the UN or the World Economic Forum. But they seem to think that the way you get out of this problem is to give them more power. Because they know better. They're smarter. They know better. And when I look at the Antichrist and the false prophet, that's basically what the false prophet does, is he forces you basically to worship, to put all your faith in the Antichrist. Right? Now, after about 4 hours of trying, Grok did give me back some possible problems with this plan, which it labeled as conspiracy theories. Okay? And it says some view the reset as a veiled agenda for elite control, including abolishing private property. Haven't you heard them tell you you will own nothing and be happy? Enforcing digital IDs or vaccines for surveillance and depopulation and feudalizing society. Under feudalism, the people worked the fields, didn't own the fields, and under a one world government. So some of us conspiracy theorists think that's what it's saying. I'm saying is when I'm reading their information and asking Grok to define it for me, that's what they're saying they're going to do. They may use slogans and nice sounding terms, but when you try to get into the frame, that's exactly what they're doing. And that exactly looks like what the Antichrist is going to do. And then it says skeptics, including conspiracy theorists and economists. When did economists become conspiracy theorists? But Grok labeled them together, conspiracy theorists and economists. They argue the Great Reset doesn't eliminate debt, but manages it through elite-driven mechanisms that can increase centralized control, inflation, and burdens on the middle class. It would eliminate the middle class. Okay? And some view it as a path to capitalism with Chinese characteristics, or the great takeover. This reset is a great takeover, potentially using crisis to enforce digital IDs or abolish private property claims. And the WEF people denied. They said that's a misinterpretation of what we're doing. I don't think so. I think they have been clear on what they're doing and what they're planning on doing. And the thing is to take the world's money and to create crisis after crisis until we agree to give them the money, right? And when we finally agree and we say, yeah, okay, we can't stand the debt anymore, and we don't really see any ownership benefits for the national forest and the national parks, so we're going to give that to you in exchange for debt and give us debt relief, and we're going to get tax relief from it, right? And we're going to feel better that that's what they want. And I said, well, that's pressure. That's kind of like the pressure that the false prophet is talked about putting on people. Now, it talks about them ultimately saying either go along or lose your head, right? So after I took all that into my brain, I said, okay, they mentioned a great reversal. How do I do this great reversal? What is a great reversal? What would a plan need to look like if I wanted to turn around everything they did? And I did a thought experiment. And I said, imagine I'm the president of the United States. And imagine that I find every goal that they want to do in this global reset to be contrary to the best interest of freedom loving people. In this experiment, I, as president, also believe that non-wartime debt being amassed by countries via endless wars, right, to be a method of which assets of those countries are being legally stolen, and the citizens are being enslaved to the holders of those instruments of debt. Okay, so I'm starting with this premise that I'm the president. I don't like the global reset. I don't like their endless wars. I don't like their amassing debt and using it as a way. And I also think that policies that are typically called green are misguided, like the Paris Climate Accords. And, I want to take care of the planet because I live here, but I don't think those are well thought out plans, right? Or they're not going to achieve the desired goal. And in the thought experiment, I tried to lay out how would I accomplish these goals? while protecting personal freedom, national sovereignty, and undermining the other goals of the World Economic Forum and these elites. And I tried to envision negative responses, because they're not just going to sit down while I do it, they're going to fight with me, right? And I said, okay, so let me do this. And as president, my administration would prioritize American sovereignty, fiscal responsibility, and individual liberties over the globalist agenda. The plan would have to focus on dismantling the entanglements with international bodies like the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the UN, etc., by slashing debt through aggressive economic reforms and harnessing digital innovations in a decentralized manner rather than centralized. And that decentralized manner has to empower citizens rather than centralized control. And this approach would undermine the World Economic Forum et al., right? Their objectives, such as centralized digital currencies and supranational climate mandates and stakeholder capitalism, by promoting free market alternatives, reducing government outreach, fostering national self-reliance. Implementation would occur in phases over that term, right? With immediate executive actions, executive orders, right? Followed by legislation pushes to international reposition. So I could start as president doing a lot with executive orders, but eventually I got to get Congress and the Senate to go along, right? So I would issue an executive order to exit agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, citing them as economically burdensome, ineffective in addressing the environmental issues while infringing on U.S. energy independence. I would replace these ideas with domestic incentives for efficient resource use, like tax credit for private sector innovations in clean coal, nuclear, natural gas extraction, right? Or even having major consumers of electrical power like AI plants build their own electricity to help fix the grid. I would suspend U.S. participation in World Economic Forums and related initiatives, and denounce the Great Reset as a threat to freedom, emphasizing how it promotes unelected global elites dictating policy. Then I would direct the State Department to review and withdraw from any non-binding World Economic Forum linked pacts. That hasn't been done yet. Okay? I would reduce funding to nonprofit organizations and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which are actively diverting funds to fund moving the World Economic Forum agenda forward. I would also reduce funding to the United Nations and affiliated bodies by 50% or totally walk away from it. You would need a replacement like, what was that, the Peace Board or whatever, Board of Peace. It could be a replacement for the UN, but you would have to. And I would redirect those savings to domestic priorities. This directly counters the World Economic Forum's plan of global governance by affirming nationalists, the America First type policy. I would push to end the policies of endless wars that create world debt and reduce human population, right? My general policies would be America First, but I would need to eliminate power centers used by the elites to foster world complex. And here are specific examples. I don't know how many of my listeners are old enough, but the CIA helped depose the Shah of Iran and install Khomeini in Iran. Back in that time frame, Khomeini was in exile, and sure, he had some followers, but even my brother-in-law, who's Lebanese, knew very little about Khomeini. And then suddenly he was everywhere. Somebody was funding him, putting big money behind him and propping him up. Somebody, caused the U.S. government to stop backing the Shah and to allow Iran to collapse. Iran has been used for now over 40 years, 45 years, to be the key source of funding terrorism and stuff in the Middle East and the source of constant wars. In the Western Hemisphere, the decision to ignore Castro was rising to power. He came to the USA and asked for help because Cuba was corrupt. The mob was down there. It was really a corrupt situation. And he came out there with the idea of fixing Cuba. And we pushed him away. And he went to the Soviets. What's he going to do? And I contend again that the CIA also helped Hugo Chavez take over Venezuela. I can't prove this, okay? But I've been in and around the government enough. I saw this happen in Argentina. I saw this happen in Venezuela and Cuba. And I've watched what appears to be outside interest that helped the rise of the cartels in Mexico and Colombia. Okay? And as I mentioned, Mark Carney, the current leader of Canada, is one of the original proponents of the World Economic Forum's global reset. So since the Canadian government and Ottawa is fully bought into this globalist agenda, I would simultaneously need to foster division between the Canadian provinces and apply economic pressure on Canada through tariffs and repatriation of businesses into the U.S., forcing a change in policy, or so weakening Ottawa that they'll be an ineffective tool of the elites. Any of this sound familiar so far? Because this would have to happen. And to further remove the foreign influence from the Western Hemisphere. We're talking from Chile, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, straight up through South America, Central America, North America, including the Caribbean, the Western Hemisphere. I need to control that first. I need to solidify U.S. power in there, right? So to do that, I would need to increase pressure on Denmark to leave Greenland. I need France out of the Caribbean, right? I need, even though Canada is an independent country from the UK, the ties are amazing, right? Got to drive that out of there. To better defend the USA against financial, political, or even military countermoves by the elites, I would need to solidify my access to rare earth minerals and force enemy forces out of the Western Hemisphere, making it easier for me to defend. We have big oceans between us and the rest of the world. And if we can solidify power here in the Western Hemisphere, it makes us easier to defend while we're dismantling the Canada and Mexico should be able to be controlled just economic power. We shouldn't need a military to do it, but it might take some military intervention to break up the drug cartels. Don't be surprised if you see military moves to start destroying cartels in Mexico and Colombia, right? I would address the debt through reform. I would enact a moratorium on non-essential federal spending, freeze hiring in federal agencies, targeting bureaucratic bloat in departments like the EPA and Health and Human Services, which often enforce green regulations, which are misguided. I would engage in mass layoffs and reduce the size of the federal government. Then I would need to audit the Federal Reserve and propose reforms to limit its role in debt monetization, arguing that endless money printing enables debt enslavement, push to the return for sound money principles, potentially auditing the U.S. gold reserves, and built to rebuild public trust. To raise capital, I'm going to need to sell off some non-strategic federal assets, like unused land, buildings, holdings, and stuff to generate immediate revenue. I may need to do that. If I can get it all through like foreign investment and repatriating businesses, that's fine. But I may need to sell off some assets. I got to raise capital. I got to do debt reduction. Has to happen if you're going to be there. But I need to reduce taxes and regulations through legislation. And you're going, well, if you're reducing debt, why are you reducing taxes? Because when they did it under Reagan and reduced taxes, the income to the federal government actually went up. The problem was the spending went up faster. Okay? I would boost revenue through tariffs and pro-growth policies. I would slash corporate taxes to 15% to repatriate trillions of overseas capital. eliminate subsidies for green industries like electric vehicles and solar panels. Sorry, Elon, that distort markets. If Elon can compete in a real market for electric vehicles and everybody else without a government subsidy, it's great. If solar panels can compete in the market, I love solar. I think it's a great idea. We have a giant energy source hanging up in the sky. We ought to be using it, right? I would look to deregulate domestic energy production and export oil, gas, look into maybe bring in $500 billion in annual surplus just from that trade. I would aim at debt elimination over the next 20 or 30 years via compounding growth, targeting 4 to 5% annual GDP growth through tariffs or endpoints or debt holder nations like China. If they manipulate currency, forcing debt renegotiation, if needed, explore sovereign debt restructuring, treating it as odorous debt imposed by prior administrations. Okay? The people holding our debt, some of the people like China, we have more tools than just paying them. Through tariffs and trade deals, I would seek to bring massive amounts of investment into USA, causing many corporations to repatriate companies onto U.S. soil, adding jobs and increasing GDP. You see that happening? Do you see companies leaving Canada and Mexico coming back to the United States? Companies that were from foreign lands like Arab countries and Asian countries want to build here? This is all tariffs doing this. Be part of my plan. I would take action to drive down oil prices, right? Weakening countries that are completely dependent on oil sales to fund things like wars. Russia could not have attacked Ukraine without a high price of oil because they just don't have the money. It was through Europe buying Russian oil that Russia had enough money to continue to fight in the war against Ukraine. Our global competitors, Russia and China, are the biggest ones, right? They're not going to sit still and watch as we strengthen the U.S. economy while weakening their economies. I need to be prepared for especially China to create spikes in the cost. They control the silver and rare earth markets. They have already taken action to limit access to those. It's driving, I just saw it today, silver is over $100. Rare earth minerals. What have you seen Trump focusing on going around the world getting rare earth mineral deals? Australia, from countries we can trust. The Japanese carry trade, which was crazy. If you don't know what it is, Japanese banks would loan money for free, for zero interest. So you go over there as a big U.S. investor, you borrow money for free. You go invest it here in something and it earns 2-3%. That's 100% profit. Okay? It's unsustainable. Japan's debt to GDP is currently 240% of their GDP. It's insane. What's keeping Japan afloat financially is a Ponzi scheme. Okay? I don't want Japan to crash. I need Japan to survive, but I need them to unwind that carry trade, doing what's called a reverse carry trade. Start repatriating that money, getting rid of that debt in Japan, bringing them more in a fiscal thing. I would propose a balanced budget amendment to Congress requiring zero deficit spending except in declared wars or emergencies. To achieve this, I would reform all entitlements, including Social Security and Medicare. And I'm a Social Security beneficiary. But I'm telling you, a lot of people getting Social Security that never paid into the system. A lot of illegals are getting Social Security. That needs to be fixed. There's a lot of people on Medicare that were never intended for. I would press to pass legislation mandating privacy protections in digital transactions, such as banning government backdoors and encryption. One of the things they're demanding, to be able to look at your bank. When I built banking networks, we tied every U.S. banking network that I worked on into Systematics out of Arkansas. Systematics is a program created by the CIA to look at your bank transactions without a warrant. Okay? Every bank in the United States is tied into Systematics. Okay? They want to do the same thing with digital transactions. I would invest in blockchain for government efficiency. Why shouldn't the government use, it costs a lot of money to print checks and money that would be used in blockchain to get your money faster. It would do that. I could use it in transparent supply chains for government procurement, because a lot of blockchain carries with it all the contracts of the terms of the contract. And I could see if somebody was actually validating it, it would be immediately auditable. Every transaction is immediately auditable using blockchain. Okay. Then I'd encourage private sector digital innovations like blockchain-based payment systems, right? But veto any central bank digital currency proposal. And the reason central bank digital currencies are a problem that we don't want in the United States, and I don't care if the rest of the world goes to them, that's up to their country, I'm dealing with the US, is it gives the central bank control over your access to money. And as president, I would issue executive guidance for tax incentives on crypto mining and adoption and positioning in the US to be a hub for decentralized finance. This increases liquidity by reducing friction in transactions and cost while protecting privacy through anonymous protocols. Reducing or eliminating the capital gains tax would repatriate massive amounts of crypto profits. Okay? Currently, if you make money in any digital asset, not only do you have to track when you made your investment, where you get your money, when it got back, and then you pay capital gains tax on it. There are countries like Portugal that have eliminated capital gains tax. If suddenly I made $100 million in capital gains on a digital currency, or digital asset, there'd be a lot of pressure for me to move to Portugal or a similar country where I could take out that $100 million with no tax impact. Right now, it's going to cost me about 20% on the federal level and another 10 or 12% in Hawaii. 30-something percent, 30 million and 100 million going right to the government. You could eliminate it and bring that wealth back, or reduce it down to, let's say, a 10% tax. Right? You're still getting some money from it. I would want a Freedom First initiative by using the bully pulpit that the president has to expose the World Economic Forum and their affiliates among U.S. corporations and politicians, requiring disclosure ties in federal contracts. I would impose tariffs or sanctions on companies advancing World Economic Forum agenda, and like those pushing the environmental for social governance idea, scoring, which is a coercive tactic of the elites. This is going on. So to be successful, I would need to foster alliances with like-minded nations. Italy, Hungary, Poland, you're starting to see, to form a bloc promoting national sovereignty, countering the World Economic Forum's multinationalism, and redirect foreign aid to only countries that reject the debt trap diplomacy, highlighting how entities like China's Belt and Road mirror debt enslavement. They have a Belt and Road program that I don't have time to explain to you here, but it's a way that they have got very much involved in Central and South America. We need to dig China out. I would seek legislation to establish a sovereign wealth fund. Have you heard of that term? From energy exports and asset sales, investing in U.S. infrastructure, and generate perpetual revenue. If you create a sovereign wealth fund that's earning money, right? That wealth fund is paying for the running of the government, not your taxes. If the sovereign wealth fund is large enough, there's no taxes required. And what it is as it's building, you would pay off debt with the taxes. Certain digital assets are going to greatly increase in value as the global economy shifts, either under the World Economic Forum plan, or under what appears to be Trump's plan. Certain assets are going to increase in value. The U.S. can benefit from those increase, right? So I would need to do my accumulation of those assets without causing spikes in the market. Because if suddenly the government started buying up thousands of Bitcoin or thousands of XRP or thousands of what any other digital asset does, price would spike like crazy, and my cost of investment would be there. I need to get those currencies, those digital assets, without adding debt to the country and without spiking the markets. How do you do that? You find criminals like Maduro, who was invested in this stuff and had tons of Bitcoin, and you go overthrow him and steal his Bitcoin. And you bring it back into the United States. It pays for your military operation, and it gives you a digital asset to be held in your sovereign wealth fund. I could then push for a constitutional amendment to limit federal debt to 60% of GDP and prohibit non-war borrowing to ensure that this can't be redone, this debt trap can't be redone. To ensure freedom, I would need to regulate the media and big tech to prevent monopolies that align with the World Economic Forum, their surveillance goals, by breaking up firms that censor free speech and collect data for globalist purposes. I would need to promote open sources, free speech, digital platforms for education and commerce, and boost liquidity through peer-to-peer economies. You and I doing business together. As U.S. debt shrinks and the economy booms, I would demonstrate that by rejecting the Green New Deal mandates and the global resets of the WEF, that it leads to prosperity. Human diplomacy, I would encourage other nations to exit similar agreements and follow my example. Right? Do what I did. I want to raise all the boats, raise the level of the lake, all the boats on the lake rise. The spirit of Antichrist is currently manifested in organizations like the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the UN, plus through other people and organizations who agree with their goals. Bill Gates, Dr. Fauci, all these people. And they're not just going to lay down while I dismantle their plan. So I need to expect resistance from entrenched interest, including from people who previously claimed to be on my side, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon, General Flynn, all these people that claim to be MAGA, that turned on the president. I would need to expect that. You should expect that. I would need to build my coalitions with freedom-oriented lawmakers and use executive authority aggressively. Global markets may react negatively to these withdrawals. Trump talked about this at Davos. It used to be when good things happen, the stock market went up. Now good things happen, the stock market crashes, and you go, okay, that's manipulation. The World Economic Forum and UN aligned nations may impose sanctions or trade restrictions, like China's actions with silver and rare earth minerals. This is done to counter the plan. Understand, this was an economic attack by China on the U.S. Okay? And I need to secure more reliable sources of these minerals, silver and rare earth, and achieve energy dominance, not just energy self-sufficiency. I got to be energy dominant. And I need to do this and diversify rapidly before they have time to respond. I would need to be functioning on a 24-hour cycle, pushing like hell. Again, any of this starting to sound familiar to you? To prevent this, I must consolidate control over the entire Western Hemisphere and move towards energy independence and self-sufficiency before they can counter moves to stop me. The globalists, with their desire for complete control, will try to co-opt and stop any policy or legislation which undermines their control or plan to enslave us through debt. As I explained, with the current market structure bill, we now have both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate trying to stop what the president and the House were doing. Therefore, I need to expect to be challenged in court at every opportunity. And I'm going to find resistance even in my own political party. Okay? Just because somebody's got an R after their name does not mean they're in favor of freedom. There are globalists in both major parties. Right? I used to say about the Bushes, they never met a globalist they didn't like, right? I need to have a plan to exert political pressure on existing congressmen and senators to cause them to vote the way I want. I need some dirt, okay, to do that. I need them to bend their knee. And it would really be helpful to me if I had evidence like them engaged in sex with minors on like Epstein Island. But to have that information remain a useful tool of coercion, I would need to simultaneously fan the flames for the release of that information to keep the threat imminent while stalling the actual release. Because once it's released, it's no longer valuable to me. I need it as a threat to force them to do what I want. You're starting to see the plan? If successful, this plan could restore American primacy. That would be the leading country in the world. I see we're well on our way, but we're at the beginning of this plan. It would eliminate debt as a control mechanism. It would harness digital liquidity for empowerment rather than subjugation, while simultaneously dismantling the World Economic Forum vision of a managed global order. So hopefully in my little thought experiment, some of you will better understand the moves and counter moves currently happening and why President Trump is seemingly fighting on 20 different fronts at once. He is, right? You may also see why compromised U.S. politicians and influencers who previously appeared to be aligned with MAGA have in unison started critiquing President Trump and averting the focus on issues like the Epstein files. Okay? The fight is against the spirit of Antichrist, and I can't promise we're going to win because I don't know how close to the end we are. If we really are at the end of the last days and ready for the tribulation, then we're going to lose this fight, and Antichrist is going to come to power. But I pray that God will let us win. And I reject the fatalist ideas that we should just lay down and let it happen because the Bible says it's coming anyway. It doesn't say it's coming this year. We have an opportunity right now to knock it back, to hold it down, and to grab onto freedom, right? But the spirit of Antichrist is not an end times thing. And it was around in the day of the apostles. Read 1 John 4:3. Okay? If this is just another manifestation of the spirit of Antichrist, then we can win this fight. But I say, I need to keep trying until God takes me home. What about you? Any of this make sense to you? And I don't usually do streams on this, but it has a religious connotation here. You've got to understand what's going on the global scale. And I find too many people, even people that claim to be awake and red-pilled, don't understand what's happening here. Because you're viewing a global cabal. You're not looking at, this is the devil doing this. This is a conspiracy theory that started in a garden. And so, here you are. So, I just did this little thought experiment as a little helpful tool. And like I said, originally I was just going to publish it on SubStack, but I thought because this just happened at Davos, this is very timely. So I opted to put it as part of my stream today. And so if you're new here, it is part of my practice. When I'm done teaching or talking or going on a rant like this, I put on a song. There's a lot of comments in the chat. I got to go back and try to read them. I will see if there's any I can respond to, and then I'll come back and talk to you for a little while. So give me after the song, I'll be back. Let me do an upbeat version of Knees. Okay.
worship you alone. You will come to take me home.
You are all I ever need. Jesus, you have set me free. I will worship you alone. You will come to take me home. You are all I ever
You're all I need.
Jesus, you have set me
You set me free.
I will worship you
I will
alone.
worship you.
You will come to take me home.
I've fallen on my knees. I will bless the Lord. Do, 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 do. Oh, oh, oh.
Okay, so I seen a comment about Palantir in the things. Yeah, and this is beyond my scope today, but Palantir and their goal. I don't know why they're close to Trump. It scares me. I'm hoping he has a plan to undermine them, because that's a seriously dangerous company and what they're planning on doing. But we're out here, and like I said, I don't normally get into politics. I don't usually talk about this subject. I'm here for the theological side, to go, this looks a lot like, I'm not a person that takes the newspaper and the Bible and go, I see prophecy being fulfilled. What I'm showing you is there's a war going on right now, and it's a war for your freedom and mine. And Proverbs, what is it, 22:7 maybe? It's in the Proverbs 22 something, talks about the rich rule over the poor, and the debtor is slave to the creditor, and that works all the time, right? Whether it's you in debt to your bank, or a government in debt to a global institution, or to a non-governmental institution, the Federal Reserve in the United States. That passing of that was a horrible thing for the U.S. freedom. And our debt began with that, right? I mean, really just started burdening. And it's a private company. It's government light. I mean, it's government connected, but it's a privately owned company that we, by constitutional amendment, gave them the power to control our economy. I can't believe it ever happened, but it's there. So on Monday, I will be back talking about Bible. Not so much on this stuff. This is a little bit of a big diversion for me. And like I said, if you're new here, I teach Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, typically on theology and not on politics or finance. Monday and Wednesday, I'll be in the book of Daniel. Next Friday, I'll talk about something else, maybe angels or something. Be something connected to Christianity, but that I don't think you'll ever be taught in church. And then I'm Donahue Papa on most platforms, Rumble, X, DLive, Donahue Papa, right? When I went over to pilled.net, Foxhole, the little comfy bunker over there, I messed up Donahue Papa and I became Bill Donahue. And when I finally went to YouTube, I couldn't get Donahue Papa, Bill Donahue, Discerning Truths. I couldn't get anything. They finally gave me Discerning Truths. What's that? 534. Rolls right off your tongue. On Tuesdays, I love talking to Neo. Neo and I have a great time. I love what she does. Neo is on there reading the Bible and discussing it with people. She hates when I say she's teaching, but she's basically reading the Bible with us, right? And Monday to Friday, 10:15 Central Time, sometimes 10:30. I tease Neil about promptness, but it's 10:15 to 10:30. Just subscribe to her, follow, and do that. You'll be able to see when she comes on. And then on Tuesdays, I come on as her Bible buddy, and we discuss stuff, whatever is interesting to Neil of that day. And then thank you, Beach Bum and Mermaid, for the subbing and gifting subs to people, and your generosity is wonderful. And like I said, Miss Olson bought me a bunch of books. I listed the books I'm interested in on Telegram that she didn't buy. I finished the second book yesterday, so I'm already writing Friday studies based on those books. They're coming up. I'm reading, books where it gives you like 3 or 4 or 5 views on a subject, and we'll discuss it and why I agree with it or don't agree with it. And then if I missed your question or you watching a replay, because most of my people are on replay, just email me, bill@discerningtruths.com. It's easier for me than DMs. I will respond to DMs when I see them, but email I'll get right away. And then, like I said, this article that I just kind of read to you is on Substack, but I will put a PDF of it up on Discerning Truths in its regular slide format, like I normally do with all the text. And or you can follow the link and go over to Substack and read it as a straight out article. And then my replays, if you want to see some of my replays, especially if you're new here, Rumble has channels. I have a Start Here channel. YouTube has playlists. There's a Start Here playlist. If you've never heard of me before today, you ought to start with those. It'll give you an idea how I approach the Bible, where I'm going, and that. And I just hope, if you've never heard of me before, what I just showed you in my thought experiment ought to give you an idea that I have a functioning brain, right? I call my brain competent. I deal with dyslexia. I fight with autistic issues, but the brain is relatively competent, and I can see what's going on, and I'm hoping you can too. And I always try to promote my good friend California, Michael Beatty. He's back from Washington streaming. Went back there, and he's helping to save the world, helping President Trump save the world, doing a great job, and then teaching through the Bible 6 days a week. Saturday is just Proverbs. Sunday, his wife Linda joins him for Psalms, and then Monday through Friday, he's in different books in the Bible. Michael goes much faster through the Bible than I do, but he is there and doing it for you. So with that, I'm going to get out of here. God bless you all for listening. If you think I'm an idiot, just, thank you anyways, and move on. If not, God willing, I'll see you on Monday. Thanks.